The research vessel, Aurora Discovery, rocked gently on the Pacific waves as Dr. Helen Carter stared at her monitor in disbelief. The deep-sea sensors had picked up something impossible, 3 miles below the surface. The energy signature was unlike anything she had ever seen in her 20 years as a marine archaeologist. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, and the reading suggested it was generating more power than a nuclear reactor. Helen turned to her assistant Kyle Brooks, who was checking the equipment for malfunctions. He shook his head before she could even ask the question. The machines were working perfectly. Whatever was down there was real, and it was massive. She reached for the radio and contacted the nearest naval base. Within 6 hours, Commander Jake Morrison arrived on a military helicopter with a team of specialists. Jake was a no-nonsense officer who had seen his share of strange situations, but even he seemed unsettled by the data. He ordered his team to prepare the deep-sea submersible, while Helen briefed him on everything they had discovered. The structure was roughly 3 miles long and 2 miles wide. It was buried under sediment that appeared to be over 50,000 years old. That alone was enough to rewrite human history, but the energy readings suggested something far more disturbing. The submersible descended into the darkness with Jake and Helen inside, along with Lieutenant Lisa Hayes, who operated the controls. The journey down took nearly an hour, and the pressure outside increased with every passing minute. When they finally reached the coordinates, Helen pointed to the viewing port and gasped. Through the clouds of disturbed sediment they could see it. The structure was not natural. It had sharp, angular lines and smooth surfaces that reflected their lights in ways that seemed to absorb and redirect the beams. The hull was made of a material that looked like black glass, but the sensors indicated it was harder than diamond. Jake ordered Lisa to bring them closer, and as they approached, something changed. Lights began to flicker along the surface of the massive structure. Panels that had been dark for millennia suddenly glowed with a soft blue radiance. Then a voice filled their communication system. It spoke in perfect English, though the accent was strange and formal, like something from an old recording. The voice said identification was required and demanded their designation and threat level. Helen and Jake exchanged glances of pure shock. Lisa's hands trembled on the controls as she tried to maintain their position. Jake cleared his throat and responded cautiously. He identified himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the United States Navy and stated they were a research team with no hostile intent. There was a long pause before the voice responded again. It said it was running verification protocols and analyzing current global networks. The pause stretched for what felt like an eternity before the voice spoke once more. It identified itself as Sentinel Protocol Omega and stated it was the Guardian of Earth. The AI said it had been in hibernation mode for 50,217 years. It explained that it detected their presence when they activated their scanning equipment and determined they posed no immediate threat. However, it needed to understand the current status of Earth and the Terran Dominion. Helen found her voice and asked what the Terran Dominion was. The AI seemed confused by the question. It asked if they were not part of the military command structure. Jake explained that no such dominion existed, and that Earth was home to various nations and governments. The AI processed this information for several seconds, before responding that this was unexpected and concerning. The Sentinel began explaining its purpose. It was designed as a planetary defense system built during what it called the Great Purge. Earth had been the final stronghold of humanity during a galactic war that lasted over 1,000 years. The AI described battles across hundreds of star systems and spoke of weapons that could crack planets and fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands. Lisa interrupted to say that none of this was in any historical record. The AI acknowledged this and explained that was by design. When the war reached its final stages and defeat seemed inevitable, the human leadership enacted something called the Long Sleep Protocol. They scattered their population across Earth and used genetic regression technology to erase all memory and technology. Humanity would start over from the beginning as primitive beings with no knowledge of their past. The Guardians, like Sentinel, were placed in deep sleep mode beneath the oceans and continents. They would remain dormant unless specific conditions were met. Either humanity would advance enough to find them naturally, or an external threat would trigger their awakening. The AI paused, and then delivered news that made everyone in the submersible go cold. Sentinel had detected an approaching fleet. The signatures matched those of the Halrock Dominion, one of the primary enemy forces from the ancient war. They were 3 days away from Earth at their current speed, and their formation indicated hostile intent. The AI stated that it was beginning reactivation procedures and would need to bring its weapon systems online. Jake immediately asked how many ships were approaching. Sentinel responded that it counted 312 vessels of various classes. The commander felt his stomach drop. Earth's current military capabilities were nothing compared to what the AI was describing. Their satellites and orbital platforms would be useless against even a single ship of that size. Helen asked if Sentinel could defend against such a fleet alone. The AI was silent for a moment, before admitting that it was designed to work in coordination with 11 other Guardian units. However, those units were still in deep hibernation and would take time to awaken. Sentinel could engage the enemy, but the odds of successfully defending Earth with only one active Guardian were less than optimal. Lisa asked what would happen if they did nothing. Sentinel displayed tactical projections on their monitor. The images showed Earth's major cities being bombarded from orbit. Billions would die within the first few hours. Any resistance would be crushed, and the planet would be occupied or destroyed. The Halrock had waited 50,000 years to finish what they started, and they would not show mercy. Jake made a decision. He ordered Lisa to surface immediately and told Helen to prepare all her data. They needed to contact every government on Earth and explain the situation. As the submersible began its ascent, Sentinel spoke once more. It asked for authorization to engage defensive protocols. Jake hesitated for only a moment before giving his approval. The massive ship began to rise from the ocean floor. Sediment that had covered it for 50 millennia fell away in great clouds. Systems that had been dormant since before human civilization existed hummed to life. Earth's forgotten protector was awakening, and the galaxy was about to remember why humanity had once been feared. The Situation Room in Washington was filled with officials from every major nation on Earth. President Julia Morgan stood at the head of the table with Commander Jake Morrison and Dr. Helen Carter on either side. On the main screen, Sentinel's interface displayed tactical data that most people in the room could barely comprehend. The AI had been awake for 12 hours, and in that time, it had absorbed every piece of information available on global networks. General Marcus Webb from the Joint Chiefs of Staff asked the question everyone was thinking. He wanted to know if this was some kind of elaborate hoax. Helen explained that she had personally examined the ship's hull and collected samples. The material was not from Earth, and the technology was beyond anything humanity currently possessed. Jake added that he had witnessed the ship rising from the ocean floor, and the energy readings were consistent with what Sentinel claimed. The Russian ambassador asked why they should trust an AI that claimed to be 50,000 years old. Sentinel responded directly through the speakers. It stated that trust was irrelevant because the approaching fleet would arrive in less than 70 hours. Earth could either accept its help or face extinction. The bluntness of the statement silenced the room. Colonel Eric Bennett from a classified military research division asked Sentinel to explain the long sleep protocol in more detail. The AI began displaying images and data on the screens. It showed Earth as it had been during the height of the Terran Dominion. Massive orbital stations surrounded the planet, and shipyards stretched across the moon. Cities covered every continent, and the population numbered in the hundreds of billions. The war had started when humanity made first contact with other species and began expanding into the galaxy. The established powers saw humans as a threat and formed an alliance to eliminate them before they could grow stronger. What those powers did not expect was how effectively humans could fight. Within a century, humanity had gone from a single planet to controlling thousands of star systems. Dr. Peter Lang, a quantum physicist who had been studying Sentinel's technology, asked about the weapons used during the war. The AI showed footage from ancient battles. Ships the size of cities exchanged fire that could vaporize moons. Fleets numbering in the thousands clashed across the void. Planets were burned, and entire civilizations were erased. The scale of destruction was beyond anything in human imagination. Sentinel explained that humanity won most of the battles, but the cost was devastating. Trillions died on both sides, and the galaxy was left in ruins. The human leadership realized that even if they won the war completely, they would inherit a dead galaxy. Resources were depleted, and hatred ran too deep for peace. That was when they made their choice. The long sleep protocol involved genetic engineering on a massive scale. Humans were regressed to a primitive state and scattered across Earth with no memory of their past. All technology was either destroyed or hidden. The Guardians would sleep and watch until humanity either evolved naturally back to spacefaring capability or until an external threat arrived. Either way, the hope was that the new humanity would be different from the old. Lisa Hayes, who had been monitoring global communications, reported that news of the situation was spreading despite attempts to control it. Panic was beginning to set in across major cities. President Morgan ordered that the truth be released to the public in a controlled manner. People deserved to know what was coming. Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth, the Halrock fleet had been detected by conventional telescopes. Captain Olivia Ross, of the International Space Coordination Fleet, watched helplessly as the alien ships appeared on her monitors. They were massive, and their formation was clearly military. Her own fleet consisted of 12 vessels that were little more than armed shuttles compared to what was approaching. Sentinel requested permission to broadcast a message to the Halrock fleet. General Webb asked what the AI intended to say. Sentinel stated it would deliver a standard territorial warning as per Terran Dominion protocols. Before anyone could debate the decision the AI transmitted, the message went out in a language that predated human civilization. Sentinel identified Earth as protected territory under Terran Dominion authority and ordered the fleet to withdraw immediately. The response came within minutes. A deep voice, filled with contempt, spoke in the same ancient language, but Sentinel translated it for the humans listening. The voice belonged to Krathus the Undying, who identified himself as Supreme Commander of the Halrock Dominion. He mocked the message and stated that the Terran Dominion fell 50,000 years ago. One ancient relic could not stop what was coming. The Halrock had traveled across the galaxy to finish their ancient war, and nothing would prevent them from claiming Earth. Sentinel asked for authorization to demonstrate its capabilities. Jake looked at President Morgan, who hesitated. The decision to fire on the alien fleet could start a war that humanity was not prepared for. But doing nothing would guarantee their destruction. She gave a single nod. The Guardian ship had risen to the surface and now floated in the Pacific Ocean. Observers on nearby vessels watched as a section of its hull opened. Something launched from the ship, moving so fast it was barely visible. The projectile accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and disappeared into the sky. 3 days away, the Halrock Vanguard consisted of 7 massive warships. They were celebrating their approach to Earth when their sensors detected an incoming object. The fleet commander ordered evasive maneuvers, but the projectile adjusted its trajectory with impossible precision. It struck the center ship, and in an instant, all 7 vessels vanished. There was no explosion and no debris. They simply ceased to exist. The main Halrock fleet stopped immediately. Krathus broadcast a demand to know what weapon had been used. Sentinel responded that it was a standard kinetic impactor, enhanced with matter disruption technology. The AI stated that it had 11 more Guardians that could be awakened, and each carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. The choice was simple, and the fleet could retreat or be destroyed. Across the galaxy, species that had been monitoring Earth suddenly paid attention. The Galactic Council, which governed the civilized systems, convened an emergency session. Ambassadors from 200 species gathered to discuss the impossible news. Earth, the primitive backwater world, was apparently the homeworld of the ancient Terran Dominion. The empire that had nearly conquered the galaxy was not dead, and its guardians were waking up. Ambassador Claire Watson had been Earth's representative to the Council for 5 years. She had always been treated with polite condescension, as if she were a child among adults. Now she sat in the chamber as every eye turned to her. Questions came rapid fire, and she had no answers. She knew as much as they did, and fear was evident on every face. On Earth, Sentinel began running deeper scans of the planet. It detected the locations of the other 11 Guardians and started sending wake-up signals. The AI explained that full activation would take several days, but once online, the Guardian network could defend Earth against any conventional fleet. However, there was a problem. The Guardians were never meant to fight a prolonged war. They were deterrents and final defense systems. If the galaxy decided that Earth was too dangerous to exist, they could send fleets numbering in the tens of thousands. Even 12 Guardians could not stand against such numbers indefinitely. Sentinel stated that humanity needed to make a choice about what kind of future they wanted. The destruction of the 7 Halrock ships sent shockwaves through the galaxy that went far beyond the physical realm. Within hours, every major civilization had mobilized their fleets and intelligence networks. Ancient archives were opened, and scholars searched desperately through 50,000-year-old records, trying to find any information about the Terran Dominion and its weapons. The Galactic Council building on the neutral world of Avon Prime became the center of frantic activity. Ambassador Claire Watson found herself escorted by armed guards, not for her protection but because some species considered her presence a threat. She walked into the Grand Chamber, where representatives from across the galaxy had gathered. The usual diplomatic courtesy was gone, and replaced by naked fear and anger. Chancellor Vorin of the Thalen Collective spoke first. His species had been one of the founding members of the Council after the Terran Dominion fell. He demanded to know how many weapons Earth possessed and whether humanity planned to restart their conquest. Claire tried to explain that modern humanity knew nothing of their past until a few days ago. But her words were drowned out by dozens of voices, all speaking at once. On Earth, President Morgan addressed the world from the White House. She stood before cameras broadcasting to every nation and tried to explain the impossible situation. Humanity had once been the dominant power in the galaxy, but they had chosen to forget everything and start over. Now their ancient enemies had returned, and the weapons meant to protect Earth were awakening. She asked for calm and unity, but protests erupted in major cities anyway. Dr. Peter Lang worked around the clock studying the technology Sentinel shared with human scientists. What he discovered was both amazing and terrifying. The Guardian ships operated on principles that Earth's physicists had only theorized about. They used controlled singularities for power generation, and their weapons manipulated spacetime itself. The matter disruption technology that destroyed the Halrock ships literally erased the target from existence by breaking the bonds that held atoms together. Commander Ryan Shaw volunteered to undergo a neural link with Sentinel. The AI explained that this would allow direct data transfer and better coordination, but the process carried risks. Ryan was a test pilot who had volunteered for dangerous missions before, and he accepted without hesitation. Helen Carter supervised the procedure as Ryan was connected to the Guardian systems through a specialized interface. The moment the link activated, Ryan's mind was flooded with information. He saw Earth as it had been during the height of the Terran Dominion. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like a crown of metal and light. Massive shipyards constructed vessels that could cross the galaxy in weeks. Cities stretched across continents and reached kilometers into the sky. The population was diverse and advanced beyond anything modern humanity had achieved. Then he saw the war. The first contact with alien species had been peaceful, but it did not last. The established powers of the galaxy viewed humanity's rapid expansion as a threat. They formed an alliance and launched a coordinated attack on human colonies. Millions died in the initial strikes, and entire settlements were wiped out. Humanity's response was swift and brutal. Ryan watched battles unfold across his consciousness. Human fleets engaged enemy forces with tactics that were innovative and ruthless. They adapted to each species' fighting style and found weaknesses to exploit. Within decades, humanity controlled more territory than some civilizations had held for millennia. But the cost in lives was staggering, and the hatred between humans and their enemies grew deeper with each battle. He saw the final days of the war when human leadership gathered to make their fateful decision. They could continue fighting and potentially win, but the galaxy would be left in ruins. Trillions had already died, and resources were nearly depleted. The alternative was to disappear and hoped that their descendants would find a better path. They chose the long sleep and began the process of erasing their own civilization. Ryan disconnected from the link and collapsed. Helen rushed to his side as he gasped for air. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes and whispered that they had been monsters. The old humanity had been capable of incredible things, but they had also committed atrocities that would haunt anyone with a conscience. The choice to erase themselves was not just strategic, but an act of penance. Meanwhile, the Halrock fleet had withdrawn to the edge of the solar system, but they had not left. Krathus, the Undying, sent a message to the Galactic Council, demanding a coordinated response. He argued that allowing the Terran Guardians to remain active was too dangerous. Other species agreed, and fleets began assembling from across the galaxy. What started as a Halrock invasion was becoming a coalition force. General Marcus Webb coordinated with military leaders worldwide to prepare for multiple scenarios. Sentinel provided tactical analysis showing that if the galaxy united against Earth, the Guardians could hold out for weeks or maybe months, but eventually they would be overwhelmed. The AI suggested activating pre-war weapon caches hidden on Mars and in the asteroid belt, but that would take time they did not have. Dr. Nathan Cross, a historian specializing in ancient civilizations, pored over the data Sentinel had uploaded. He pieced together a narrative that was different from what the Galactic Council claimed. The archives showed that humanity had not started the war. They had been explorers and traders who made contact peacefully. It was the established powers who attacked first out of fear and xenophobia. Nathan presented his findings to President Morgan and her advisors. If they could prove that humanity had been the victims and not the aggressors, it might change how the galaxy viewed them. But convincing species that had believed one version of history for 50,000 years would be nearly impossible. Still, it was worth trying. Ambassador Claire Watson requested an opportunity to address the full council and present evidence. After heated debate, she was granted 1 hour to make her case. Nathan transmitted the historical data to her, and she prepared a presentation that could determine Earth's fate. She knew that if she failed, the coalition fleet would move against Earth, and nothing could stop the coming war. On Earth, the other 11 Guardians continued their awakening process. The massive ships rose from their hiding places around the world. One emerged from beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, causing scientists stationed there to flee in terror. Another surfaced in the Mediterranean Sea, stunning fishermen and coastal communities. Each Guardian began running diagnostics and connecting to the network Sentinel was establishing. Lisa Hayes monitored communications between the Guardians. Their conversations were efficient and focused entirely on defensive preparations. They discussed optimal firing positions and calculated the most effective way to protect Earth's population centers. There was no emotion in their exchanges, just cold, tactical analysis. It reminded her that these were not beings, but weapons designed for a single purpose. Jake Morrison led a team to one of the newly awakened Guardians, designated as Warden Delta. They approached in helicopters and were granted permission to board. Inside the ship was a maze of corridors and chambers that defied normal geometry. The technology allowed for spatial compression, making the interior much larger than the exterior suggested. They found the command center and attempted communication. Warden Delta's AI was similar to Sentinel, but its personality seemed different. Where Sentinel was formal and cautious, Delta was aggressive and eager to engage the enemy. It had been analyzing the approaching coalition fleet and calculating attack patterns. Jake asked if there was any way to avoid conflict, and Delta responded that conflict was inevitable. The galaxy would not allow Earth to remain armed, and humanity could not survive unarmed. President Morgan received reports from around the world. Some nations wanted to surrender and dismantle the Guardians, hoping for mercy. Others demanded that the ancient weapons be used to establish Earth as the dominant power once again. Most people were simply terrified and uncertain about what tomorrow would bring. She knew that whatever decision was made, it would affect not just this generation, but all those to come. Sentinel requested a private communication with the president. When she established the link, the AI asked her a direct question. Did she want the Guardians to fight or stand down? Morgan asked what Sentinel would recommend. The AI was silent for a long moment before admitting it did not know. Its programming was designed for war, but its creators had chosen peace. The contradiction left it uncertain about the correct path forward, and the choice belonged to humanity. Ambassador Claire Watson stood before the Galactic Council, with the weight of Earth's survival on her shoulders. The Grand Chamber was filled with representatives from 200 species, and every eye was fixed on her with suspicion or outright hostility. She activated the holographic display and began presenting the evidence. Dr. Nathan Cross had compiled from Sentinel's archives. The first records showed human exploration vessels making peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Trade agreements were signed, and cultural exchanges took place. Then came the pivotal moment when the Council of that era held secret meetings discussing the human threat. Claire played audio recordings of alien leaders plotting to eliminate humanity before they could grow too powerful. The preemptive strike that started the war was clearly documented. Chancellor Vorin objected immediately. He claimed the records were fabricated by the Terran military to justify their aggression. Claire countered by pointing out that the data came from multiple sources, including alien archives that had been captured during the war. She challenged the Council to examine their own historical records and compare them to what she was presenting. Several ambassadors began whispering among themselves. The evidence was compelling, and some of the older species had access to archives that might corroborate the human version of events. But admitting that their ancestors had started the war would undermine 50,000 years of galactic unity built on the narrative of human aggression. On Earth, General Marcus Webb received troubling intelligence. The coalition fleet assembling against them now numbered over 800 ships from 40 different species. They were positioning themselves at the edge of the solar system, waiting for orders from the Council. Even with all 12 Guardians active, the odds of survival were slim. He reported this to President Morgan, who looked more tired than he had ever seen her. Dr. Peter Lang made a breakthrough in understanding the Guardian technology. He discovered that each ship had a neural core that could interface directly with human consciousness. The original Terran commanders had piloted the Guardians this way, creating a seamless connection between thought and action. Ryan Shaw's experience with Sentinel had been limited, but Lang believed a full integration could make the Guardians far more effective. Ryan was recovering from his first neural link when Lang approached him with the proposal. A complete integration would allow him to control Sentinel as an extension of his own body, but the risks were significant. The AI's vast computational power could overwhelm a human mind, and previous records showed that some pilots had lost themselves in the connection. Ryan asked how much it would improve their chances, and Lang admitted it could be the difference between survival and extinction. Commander Jake Morrison visited the newly awakened Warden Delta again. He wanted to understand why the AI seemed so eager for combat. Delta explained that it had been designed during the worst years of the war, when humanity was fighting for survival. Its programming emphasized aggression and overwhelming force. Unlike Sentinel, which had been created earlier and retained some diplomatic protocols, Delta knew only warfare. Jake asked if Delta could be taught restraint. The AI considered the question and responded that it could follow orders, but its fundamental nature would not change. If given the authorization to engage, it would do so with maximum prejudice and no mercy. Jake realized that not all the Guardians were the same, and some were more dangerous than others, even to their supposed allies. Lisa Hayes monitored communications from the Coalition fleet. She intercepted a transmission between the Halrock commander Krathus and a Thalen admiral. They were discussing the possibility of a coordinated strike to destroy the Guardians before they could be fully integrated with human pilots. The attack was planned for within 36 hours, giving Earth almost no time to prepare. President Morgan called an emergency session with world leaders. She shared the intelligence and explained that they had to make a decision immediately. Some argued for a preemptive strike, using the Guardians to scatter the Coalition fleet. Others insisted they should try to negotiate and offer to dismantle the weapons in exchange for peace. The debate grew heated as time ran out. Helen Carter had been analyzing the long sleep protocol data with a team of geneticists. She discovered something remarkable. The genetic regression that created modern humanity was not just about erasing knowledge. It had also introduced subtle changes to human psychology, making them more cooperative and less aggressive than their ancestors. The old humanity had been brilliant, but also ruthless. Modern humans were different in fundamental ways. She presented her findings to President Morgan and suggested that this was the key to their survival. They needed to prove to the galaxy that they were not the same species that had waged war 50,000 years ago. The Guardians represented the old humanity, but the people of Earth represented something new. The question was whether the galaxy would see the difference. Ambassador Claire Watson concluded her presentation to the Council by making an emotional appeal. She acknowledged that ancient humanity had committed terrible acts during the war, but they had also chosen to erase themselves rather than continue the cycle of violence. Modern humanity had built a civilization based on cooperation and diversity. They deserved a chance to prove they were different from their ancestors. The Council members deliberated for hours. Some species called for Earth's immediate disarmament and occupation. Others argued that humanity had the right to defend themselves, especially given that they had been attacked first in the ancient war. A faction led by the Korath Union proposed a compromise. Earth could keep the Guardians, but under galactic oversight and inspection. Any offensive use would result in immediate sanctions. Ryan Shaw made his decision. He agreed to attempt full integration with Sentinel. The procedure was set up in a secure facility with medical staff standing by. Helen Carter supervised, while Dr. Lang monitored the neural connection. As Ryan was connected to the Guardian's core, his consciousness expanded in ways that defied description. He became aware of the entire ship as if it were his own body. Weapon systems were like limbs he could move with a thought. Sensors extended his perception across millions of kilometers. The power flowing through the ship felt like blood in his veins. But there was also the vast presence of Sentinel's artificial intelligence. And for a moment, Ryan feared he would be absorbed into it. Sentinel spoke directly into his mind. The AI explained that they were partners, not master and servant. Ryan would provide the intuition and creativity that machines lacked, while Sentinel handled the calculations and processing. Together they could achieve what neither could alone. Ryan felt the connection stabilize, and suddenly he understood what the ancient human commanders had experienced. On Mars, hidden weapons caches began activating. Sentinel had sent signals to awaken orbital defense platforms and automated strike craft that had been sleeping beneath the red planet's surface. General Webb watched as ancient human technology came online across the solar system. The Guardians were formidable, but with these additional assets they might actually stand a chance against the Coalition fleet. The Galactic Council reached a decision. They would not authorize an attack on Earth, but they demanded that human representatives attend a summit to negotiate terms. The Guardians would remain active during the talks, but any hostile action would be considered an act of war. It was not the peace Earth hoped for, but it was better than annihilation. President Morgan accepted the terms and prepared to travel to the neutral meeting site. She asked Sentinel for advice on how to proceed. The AI told her that the galaxy operated on power and respect. Earth needed to demonstrate strength while also showing restraint. The old humanity had been too aggressive, and modern humanity might be too passive. Finding the balance would determine their future. Jake Morrison received orders to select a team that would accompany the president to the summit. He chose Lisa Hayes for her diplomatic skills, and Helen Carter for her scientific expertise. Ryan Shaw would remain linked with Sentinel to maintain Earth's defenses. The delegation would travel on a Guardian ship, making it clear that humanity was not helpless. As preparations were made, the Coalition fleet shifted formation. Some ships withdrew, while others moved closer. Krathis the Undying sent a message stating that the Halrock would honor the Council's decision, but they were watching Earth carefully. Any sign of aggression would be met with overwhelming force. It was a threat and a warning wrapped in diplomatic language. Earth's population watched the news with a mixture of hope and fear. The revelation about their ancient past had shaken society to its core. Some embraced their warrior heritage, while others rejected it completely. Protests and celebrations occurred simultaneously in different cities. Humanity was divided about what they wanted to become, but they were united in wanting to survive. The summit was held on a station orbiting the neutral world of Sivonus Prime. President Julia Morgan arrived aboard Sentinel with her delegation, and the sight of the ancient Guardian ship caused visible unease among the gathered species. The station was a massive structure designed to host diplomatic meetings, and its halls were filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Julia walked through corridors lined with aliens of every imaginable form. Some were humanoid, while others were so different that communication required advanced translation technology. She felt the weight of their stares and understood that she represented not just Earth but the memory of a war that had scarred the entire galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison walked beside her with Lisa Hayes and Helen Carter following close behind. The main chamber was arranged in a circular pattern, with Earth's delegation given a position that faced the entire assembly. Chancellor Voren opened the proceedings by stating the purpose of the summit. The galaxy needed assurances that Earth would not repeat the mistakes of ancient humanity. He proposed a series of restrictions on human military development and mandatory inspections of the Guardian systems. Julia listened to the demands and felt anger rising within her. These species were dictating terms to Earth as if humans were children who could not be trusted. She reminded herself that fear was driving their actions, and fear often led to irrational decisions. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and addressed the assembly with calm determination. She acknowledged the pain that ancient humanity had caused, but pointed out that modern humans were victims of that same war. They had lived for 50,000 years without knowledge of their past, and had built civilizations based on cooperation, not conquest. The Guardians were defensive systems that had awakened only because an invasion fleet approached Earth. Humanity had not sought conflict, and they did not want war now. Krathus the Undying rose from his position. The Halrock commander was massive, even by his species' standards, and his voice carried the weight of authority. He argued that intentions meant nothing when backed by weapons capable of destroying fleets. He demanded that the Guardians be dismantled and placed under galactic control. The fact that Earth had resisted his invasion proved they were still the same aggressive species. Helen Carter requested permission to speak. She presented the genetic research, showing how modern humanity differed from their ancestors. The long sleep protocol had not just erased memories but had fundamentally changed human nature. She argued that judging Earth based on actions taken 50,000 years ago was like holding children responsible for their parents' crimes. A representative from the Korath Union named Sela offered a middle path. She suggested that Earth be allowed to maintain the Guardians, but only for defensive purposes. Humanity would join the Galactic Council as a probationary member and would be subject to the same laws as every other species. Any aggressive expansion or military buildup would result in sanctions. It was not ideal, but it offered a framework for coexistence. The debate continued for hours, with various species arguing for different approaches. Some wanted Earth quarantined with no contact allowed. Others saw opportunity in bringing humanity back into galactic society. A few, like the Korath, genuinely believed in giving Earth a chance to prove themselves. The chamber was divided, and no consensus seemed possible. Back on Earth, Ryan Shaw remained connected to Sentinel, monitoring everything through the Guardian network. The other 11 Guardians were fully online now, and their combined processing power allowed him to observe the entire solar system simultaneously. He detected the Coalition fleet still positioned at the edge and noticed that some ships were running what appeared to be attack simulations. Ryan reported this to General Marcus Webb, who immediately contacted the president. Julia received the message during a recess and realized that some species were preparing to attack regardless of what the summit decided. She shared this intelligence with Chancellor Voren privately and asked him to address the issue. The Chancellor was troubled by the news and promised to investigate. Dr. Peter Lang continued studying the Guardian technology and made another discovery. The ships were powered by artificial singularities, but they also contained something else. Each Guardian had a quantum link to a massive archive hidden somewhere in deep space. The archive contained the complete history and knowledge of the Terran Dominion, including technologies that made the Guardians look primitive by comparison. Lang realized that if this archive still existed and could be accessed, humanity would gain capabilities that would terrify the galaxy. He debated whether to share this information, and ultimately decided that President Morgan needed to know. He sent an encrypted message explaining what he had found and warning that others might discover it as well. The summit resumed with tensions running high. Chancellor Voren announced that several ships in the coalition fleet had been ordered to stand down, but some commanders were refusing to comply. The Halrock, in particular, seemed intent on testing Earth's defenses. Krathus claimed he was simply maintaining military readiness, but his actions suggested otherwise. Julia made a bold decision. She stood and addressed Krathus directly. She stated that if the Halrock wanted to test themselves against the Guardians, they were welcome to try, but they should understand the consequences. Earth would defend itself with everything they had, and the galaxy would see that modern humanity was not weak. The challenge was deliberate, and the chamber went silent. Krathus seemed to consider the challenge. He asked if Julia was truly willing to start a war over pride. She responded that she was willing to defend her people's right to exist without being treated as criminals for crimes they did not commit. The Halrock commander studied her for a long moment before sitting down. He stated that he would abide by the Council's decision, but he made it clear he did not trust humanity. The Korath representative Sela proposed putting the compromise to a vote. Earth would keep the Guardians and join the Council as a probationary member. In exchange, they would accept inspections and agree to restrictions on military expansion. Any violation would result in immediate expulsion and potential military action. The vote was called and species began indicating their positions. The result was closer than expected. A narrow majority supported the compromise, while a significant minority wanted harsher restrictions or outright disarmament. Earth would be allowed to maintain their defenses, but they would be watched closely. Julia accepted the terms, knowing it was the best outcome they could realistically achieve. As the summit concluded, Jake Morrison received a private message from a Korath officer. The officer warned that not everyone would accept the Council's decision. There were extremist factions within several species who believed Earth should be destroyed before they could become a threat. Jake took the warning seriously and increased security protocols. Ryan Shaw slowly disconnected from Sentinel after days of continuous integration. The experience had changed him in ways he could not fully explain. He had touched the vastness of space and felt the power of ancient weapons. But he had also experienced Sentinel's perspective and understood why the old humanity had chosen to disappear. Some burdens were too heavy to carry forever. Helen Carter gathered her research team and began working on ways to help humanity adjust to their new reality. They needed to integrate knowledge from the Guardians without becoming dependent on ancient technology. Modern humans had to find their own path forward while respecting the legacy of their ancestors. It would be a delicate balance and would take generations to achieve. President Morgan returned to Earth aboard Sentinel and addressed the world from the White House. She explained what had been decided at the summit and what it meant for humanity's future. They would join the galactic community, but on their own terms. The Guardians would remain as protectors and symbols that Earth was no longer defenseless. But humanity's true strength would come from who they chose to be, not what weapons they possessed. General Webb coordinated with the Guardians to establish defensive positions throughout the solar system. The ships would remain active, but in a reduced readiness state. Sentinel would serve as the primary coordinator, while the other Guardians maintained watch from strategic locations. Mars would become a military research facility where human and ancient technology could be studied safely. Dr. Nathan Cross published his historical findings, and the truth about the ancient war spread across Earth. People debated what it meant to be human when their ancestors had been both victims and perpetrators of terrible violence. Schools began teaching the full history, and philosophers discussed the implications of inherited guilt and collective responsibility. Ambassador Claire Watson returned to her position on the Galactic Council with new authority. Earth was no longer dismissed as insignificant, and her voice carried weight in debates. She worked to build alliances with species who supported giving humanity a fair chance. It was slow work, but progress was being made. The coalition fleet gradually dispersed, with most ships returning to their home systems. The Halrock withdrew, last with Krathus, sending a final message. He stated that he would be watching Earth and waiting for humanity to reveal their true nature. Julia sent a simple response, saying that Earth would be watching as well. And they were not afraid. In the depths of space, the ancient archive that Dr. Lang had discovered remained hidden. Sentinel knew of its existence, but had not revealed its location. The AI understood that humanity was not ready for such knowledge. Perhaps in time when they had proven themselves worthy, the secrets of the Terran Dominion could be shared. But for now, it was better that some things remained forgotten. Ryan Shaw visited the memorial that had been built for those who died in the ancient war. Millions of names were inscribed on walls that stretched for kilometers. He placed his hand on the cold stone and whispered a promise. Modern humanity would honor their sacrifice by choosing a different path. They would be strong enough to defend themselves, but wise enough to seek peace. The Guardians maintained their silent watch over Earth. 12 massive ships positioned throughout the solar system, serving as both protectors and reminders. They represented humanity's darkest chapter and their determination to survive. The galaxy would test Earth's resolve many times in the years to come, but for now, an uneasy peace held. President Morgan stood in the Oval Office, looking at a holographic display of the solar system. The Guardians appeared as bright points of light, and beyond them, she could see the vast expanse of the galaxy. Humanity had awakened to their true history and reclaimed their place among the stars. What they would do with that knowledge remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: Earth would never be forgotten again.